friends of Spiritism Today, welcome.
We're glad you could be able to join us to explore Spiritism.
Now our daughter will offer the opening prayer.
Please pray with me. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed by thy name. Lord, we believe in thee because everything about us reveals your goodness and your power. Blind then is the one who does not recognize your works. Prideful is the one who does not worship you. The ungrateful is the one who does not give thanks to you.
Today, we will bring you an understanding about Spiritism and its teachings. Does God exist? Can one communicate with spirits? Is there a such thing as reincarnation?
Now our Spiritist speaker will answer this question and much more.
We invite Dr. Nahur Fonseca to the podium to enlighten us on the photography of the thought. Please welcome Dr. Fonseca. Nahur Fonseca is a second-generation Spiritist who has worked with youth groups for more than 10 years in Brazil and for 5 years in the U.S. He is also a speaker at the Allan Kardec Spiritist Society of Massachusetts and also a coordinator of the Family Spiritist Retreat. He's one of the associate editors of the Spiritist magazine. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Fonseca.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. As soon as the slides show up, here they are. So we are going to talk about the photograph of the thought. And this is one of the most beautiful photographs that I know. And I'm going to show different perspectives of the thought, going from common sense to science and then the Spiritist view. So, are the thoughts something abstract or something concrete? We have learned at school that thoughts belong to the group of words of abstract nouns, along with feelings, friendship, because they need someone to act, to do it, to think, to feel. What we are going to try to show to you this afternoon is that thoughts, without changing the English grammar, are more concrete than we imagine. They can impact in our physical bodies, physical materials, things, and also in our psychological mind. So, to show the first point, I would like to emphasize or bring this work by Dr. Masaru Emoto from Japan, from the Hado Institute. What they did is they collected samples of water, put them in petri dishes, exposed this water to different thoughts, and then froze the water. As the water was melting, they took pictures in a microscope. And I'm going to show you some of the pictures that they took. So first is water from the Fujiwara Dam, which is polluted water, before and after being offered a prayer by a Buddhist monk. So we can see that on your right side, the water is much more structured than in the left side. So this is what happens with spiritually magnetized water. So we can see that there is a physical phenomena going on. These other two pictures, one was exposed to the word arigato, which is thank you in Japanese, and the other one was exposed to the phrase I will kill you. So they repeated these experiments with different words, language, different religious people, and all the conclusions were the same. The thoughts that are positive had a positive effect on water, and negative thoughts have rearranged the structure of water. So the inescapable conclusion is that, well, if thoughts can do that to water, what can it do to us? We are 75% water. So of course, we're going to have this physical impact of thoughts in our bodies. Other scientists have seek to take pictures of the thoughts, and they have focused their attention mainly in the brain. So you have electroencephalograms, functional MRIs. All these tools are getting more and more refined. Scientists now are able to predict what the person is thinking before the person expresses it through word or by pressing a button. This will lead the path to the next generation human-computer interfaces. We're going to act on computers using our thoughts. So this is especially good for those who have paralysis and other physical inabilities. But the question that we raise is the brain the origin of the thoughts? So let me put this more clear. Can a dead brain think? No, probably not. But can the spirit of the dead think? That for sure. That we know. So where science stops because it's ill-equipped, Spiritism comes in. So Allan Kardec defines Spiritism as a science to study the origin destination of spirits and their interaction with the corporeal world. And as we saw earlier, Allan Kardec was lucid enough to say that if in any point Spiritism disagrees with science, we give up that point from Spiritism and follow science. So what we're going to show are some of these ideas of what thoughts are made of from the Spiritist perspective. As the telescope and the microscope opened the doors to the very large world and the very small world, what we are going to see is that mediumship is the tool to probe the spiritual world. Spiritists didn't invent it because it's a natural sense. It's our sixth sense, like vision or hearing. But Spiritism has introduced a methodological way to safely and purposefully use mediumship. André Luiz, in his book, Mechanism of Mediumship, explains that we are surrounded by waves, from the very large radio waves to the very small and very high frequency and very energetic energy inside the atoms. Our physical body has only a limited perception of this whole spectrum, which is basically the visible light, from the low energy of red light to the high energy of blue and purple light. But the limits of this spectrum are not at all known by science. Are there higher frequency energy or higher frequency waves? Are there lower frequency? Of course there are. And that's what we're going to talk about. A very important landmark in science was the discovery that light doesn't only behave as a wave, but also as a particle. It has mass. So if you put a beam of light on grains of dust, it can move the grains of dust lightly. So the scientists made the opposite question. So can particles also behave as wave? And suddenly, what we know as matter is no longer. Any matter that we see, even this podium, can be described by a mathematical equation. So, and where are these waves vibrating on? You know that the waves of the sea vibrate on water. My sound, my voice is vibrating in the air and reaching our ears. But where these other magnetic, electromagnetic waves move on? And André Luiz explained to us that that is the cosmic fluid or cosmic field. That's the medium where not only these magnetic waves move, but our thoughts move as well. And from the book of Genesis, that we're going to hear more in the end, the cosmic field is the elementary matter. In its pure state, that it's inconceivable for us, it is very pure, very elementary. All that we see are transformations of this elementary matter. And this fluid, this matter, when surrounded in a focus of intelligence, we call it the perispirit. It is our spiritual body, and it receives the quality of our mind, our psychology. It will be calming if we are a calming person. It will be unrestful or stressant if we are that way too. So spirits manipulate this fluid cosmic, this fluid field, as we manipulate matter, but they only use their thoughts and their will. As was illustrated in this movie by Robin Williams, What Dreams May Come, in a Hollywood way, spirits can create lots of things. They can create the physical appearance that may not be the same that we knew from his previous life, right? So for a more realistic view of that, I recommend this book by Andrea Luiz, which is And Life Goes On, where he reports on the experience of two spirits recently deceased and their discoveries in the spiritual realm of what they could do with their thoughts. And it's very interesting reading for all of us. So there's a whole new field of phenomena to explore out there. There are no other causes for some of our illnesses than the thoughts that we carry. So another perspective on thoughts is that thought is also a wave. It's not only matter. How many of us have, before answering the phone, know, oh, somebody's calling me, and then when we get, oh, I knew you're calling, or complete each other's phrases. So thought is also a wave, and as light and other types of waves, thoughts have frequency. The angels, the wave, the frequency of the thoughts of angels are super short, like the frequencies of the atoms that we have on Earth. But we also have short frequencies, medium frequencies, and long frequencies. Of course, the most shorter the frequency, the higher the frequency, the higher the energy, and short the wavelength. This is all physics. We don't need to go into that. But what I want to emphasize here is that how can we generate these thoughts? When? So the short wavelengths or high frequency, we generate them in moments of deep emotions, unspeakable sorrows, or very heartfelt prayers. So when we're doing one of those things, we are generating these very high frequency thoughts. And the higher the frequency, the higher the energy, the most transformation, the most impact it can have on us. The medium frequencies is when we're learning something, when we're studying. So if you're studying something, not only at schools or universities, but if you're studying about yourself, analyzing yourself every night, what we did that wasn't so good, what we can improve, you're also generating this kind of waves, which are very beneficial. And you have this long wave, which is the normal waves, the everyday waves that we generate when we're doing anything special. So, vibrations are everywhere. Even a rock emits vibrations. And we have this powerful tuner in our heads that we can choose where we want to tune. We want the good energy, the high frequencies, or the low energy, low frequencies. We know that we have busy lives and we go through traffic jams every day to go to work. But even for our brain, it doesn't matter if we are in a scenic place or in a traffic jam. It matters what we think of, what we imagine. So I'd like to ask of you, say cheese, because we're about to take a picture of our thoughts, and I'd like everyone to look nice. So how can we look nicer in the picture, right? So we have a few recommendations. I'm sure there are plenty more. First, since we cannot stop thinking, every time we watch our thoughts and see that's not good, let's change it. Substitute for something better. So instead of focusing on the bad habits of someone, focus on the good ones, so the person will be motivated to change, especially our children. We should not say, oh, you're a devil. We should say the opposite, oh, you're my angel. I love when you do this. I love when you do that, right? Meditate more. So I told we have this busy life, but we don't need to live a life of reclusion to meditate. If every day we read a phrase from the gospel and meditate on that, and every time that something happens to us, we remember that phrase, that will do a great change in our lives already. pray, that's the moment when we connect to these higher frequencies, waves of the angels, of God, right? And also transform the hardships of life into lessons. Because if the most useless suffering is the one that we don't learn anything. And when we are learning, when we're suffering and praying for God to get the energy to go through it, we're generating these waves. And those waves are changing our spirit, because everything we think, we create in the spiritual world. So one day we'll be able to say, as Jesus said, that he and the Father was one. That means he was tuned. He was a perfect medium. He had the thoughts, he was in resonance with the thoughts of God. So by little, we'll get there. So thank you, everyone. And
we hope you really enjoyed this wonderful experience in the poster session. And now that we've discussed the foundation of Spiritism and its practice, how about we meditate on why American spirituality needs Spiritism? Our format is a roundtable discussion composed of Ms. Gloria Coello, President, Founder of the Caritas Spiritist Center in Boulder, Colorado; Mrs. Amy Bianc, President of the Intuition Unlimited and the Angel Center in Oswego, Illinois; and Mr. Mauricio Cisneros, President, Founder of the Christian Spiritist Study Center in Pompano Beach, Florida. Please let us welcome our roundtable discussion speakers and our moderator for this session, Vanessa Anceloni.
When we thought about this section, why American spirituality needs Spiritism, we thought about sharing reflections, observations, just like in any science. Scientists, they get together to share their personal discoveries. And we thought that Gloria Coelho, Amy Bianc, and Mauricio Cisneros could certainly, in a very complementary way, lead us in these reflections. This is not a conclusive section. It's instead an opportunity to open our hearts to really start working in this line. This section has two main highlights. One, why actually American spirituality needs Spiritism, and if actually it is in need of what it has to offer. And the second one is how we can actually implement it to a greater extent. So I'd like to ask our friend Gloria Coelho to begin the discussion. We're going to give 5 minutes to each of the presenters, and then we'll do a second round on the next topic with possibilities of discussions.
Well, having grown up, is the microphone? Having grown up in the United States and following the traditions that I was raised in Catholicism, and also had many Jewish friends, and so I knew a little bit about Judaism. And then later, seeing the influx of Eastern traditions catch hold here in America with its belief in reincarnation and meditation and many wonderful things. One of the main things, I think, that the selective importation of the Eastern traditions and our Judeo-Christian heritage has left out is any kind of real understanding about the afterlife. And, you know, being raised Catholic, we were taught that after you die, you go to heaven or you go to hell. If you're good, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you go to hell. And I never found that very inspiring, because it seemed to me that what do you do if you go to heaven? Of course, I didn't want to go to hell, but what do I do if I go to heaven? And, you know, the nuns would say, well, you see God. And I would think, well, that's really cool, but what about after I've seen him? And plus the idea of eternity, you know, being there for all eternity. And what was I going to do there? So I think that there is kind of a vacuum in this one area, and this is not, of course, the only thing that Spiritism has to offer. There are many things. But I think that a lot of people, having grown up with that concept, they eventually reject it because it's too simplistic, but they don't have anything to fill that void, to replace it with. And so it results in a terrible fear of death. And our culture, I think, is permeated by a fear of death that leads to a taboo of the subject. You can't talk about death. If you talk about death or afterlife, you're being morbid. It's a taboo. And yet, the press, the media, is obsessed with it. You can't turn on the television without seeing either a newscast about people dying or a movie about people dying or being threatened with death or something. So I think Spiritism and all the information, just reading the Spirit book, the Spirit's book, is a tremendous consolation to Americans to know that, you know, even the Eastern religions, the bits that we've imported, because we haven't imported them in totality, the bits that we imported does talk about reincarnation, but not about in-between lifetimes. And so I think the Spirit's book is just such a wonderful tool to explain to people that you're not in some static state, you know, and it's not a bad thing. So that's one of the things that Spiritism, I believe, has to offer our culture, is the information that after we die, that it's not such a different state. It is different because we're not limited, but it's a liberation, if anything. And, you know, and that it matters what we're doing here. While we're in bodies, it matters because that is going to dictate how the afterlife is. But that it can be very productive, very euphoric, very joyous, and not at all stagnant, and you're not on a cloud playing the harp. So, shall I go on?
How about, right, if we move along to Mauricio, and then I know we'll have other opportunities for Gloria to continue on those thoughts.
Hello, everyone. This is so interesting when they told us about, when this idea came up about doing this setting here, was like, you know, that's good. It feels like one of our Spiritist Center study group meetings where we can sit down and talk and exchange ideas. It feels good. And one of the things I was thinking about when I first saw the topic that was given, that was put into the program, was like, wow, how can we talk about these things and say it in a very nice way? What can we give? What can Spiritism teach and give to other creeds, other doctrines, other religions? Sometimes it's a subject that's not very easy to say and to talk about. But the whole idea here is not really to say, all right, we are better than them, or better than one, or better than another. That's not the point of all this here. That's not what the point of Spiritism is at all. You know, we are never working for Spiritism and with Spiritism to make other people really become Spiritists. Or it's not like we want the whole world to be labeled and become Spiritists and be labeled as Spiritists. That is not the point. The whole purpose of the doctrine is to, and I really think was the same purpose of the message, of the Christian message, of Jesus' message, is to allow people and educate people so they can walk on their own 2 feet, really. And that's the major point that Spiritism and Christianity and what Jesus tried to do it was to tell us, listen, just grow within, and once you get there, once you've grown, you won't need too much anymore. You already know how to walk on your own. Allan Kardec starts the Spirit's book, and I really mean starts at the introduction of the Spirit's book. The very first things he writes, and I'm sure he spent countless days and nights trying to think about this. How am I going to start such a thing? A group of thoughts that come from the other world. How am I going to start it? This whole major, massive project. And he starts by saying that this whole group of thoughts needs a new name because it's totally new. He couldn't mix it up with anything else. If he did, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work at all. So he found a name for it, Spiritism. But right after that first chapter in the introduction of the Spirit's book, he starts talking about a very important topic, which is, what do we understand to be the soul? And he gives a few descriptions about what the soul is for different people and for different religions and doctrines. And many believe that the soul exists simply because the physical body exists. Many others believe that the soul goes on and is the cause of the physical body. But the message Kardec wanted to give us in them first words of the Spiritist compilation really was not just that the soul exists. It's not just that the soul goes on. He wanted to really let everybody know from that point on that the life of the spirit, of the soul, is the real life. So it's not that we should think, okay, life is going to go on. There's life after death. That is really not what Kardec wanted to tell us in that introduction. He wanted to tell us that the real life is the spiritual life. There is no death. And once we pass that message on, once the Spiritism gets that message out there, I think many people from other religions, non-religious people are going to be much better off in the way they walk.
Thank you, Mauricio. Amy Bianca. Yes.
Hello. I'm a minority here, seeing as I'm not a Brazilian and wasn't born into a Spiritist family. I found it quite by accident. All over the United States and all over the world, God has planted seeds in people's hearts. And those seeds begin to germinate Sometimes it's a moment of love or a moment of beauty that makes that seed stir in your heart, doesn't it? Sometimes it's the death of a loved one, and it's a painful germination, or it's an illness, a devastating illness that we heard about that can germinate that seed. And when that happens, people begin to go on the move. They begin to look for nourishing soil to be able to grow that seed in their heart. Many of them, and believe me, this has to be a miracle, many of them go to Brazil. I don't know, you know, it wasn't my place of choice to go. I went once and became a tour guide. That's how pixelated I was. Over the 10 years, I've taken over 2,000 people to Brazil. I didn't even know why I was doing it. I just knew that when I was there, I felt closer to God somehow, closer to a miracle. And when I watched the Spiritists work, although some of the centers I went to had varying takes on spirituality, it was still a theme that the good spirits were always there helping us. I felt cradled and held. And yet when I came home, I would take these tourists with me, and they would become all excited. They loved God, they were experiencing Jesus, they were having out-of-body experiences, they were healed. And yet when I brought them home, their plans to change their lives would wither. When I looked at the flowers here, I thought, these were my tourists. They were all, oh. Some of them would come back again, and I decided maybe North Americans are materialistic. So I started taking them to orphanages in Brazil. I discovered José Medrado and Cidade de Luz. I discovered Divaldo Franco. I took them to Salvador. I said, see here, this is, you help people. See this? This is what you do. It's not just all about you. It's all about people. Okay, this is what it is. And they got fired up, you know, and they go home to their churches and their religions. The local Catholic church, one of my people said, I'm believing God again. I want to go back to church. And the priest said you had to sign a piece of paper that said you couldn't be a medium. I didn't want to be a church. I wanted them to go back to their origins. Well, I began to read, and I met a wonderful woman, Jussora Korngold, and her husband, Joao, who had translated, thank God, some of the books into English. And I began to read, how could I help these people who had gone on tours with me to blossom? What could I do? So I read all of the Spiritist books. Sometimes my eyes were blurring. And do you know how long it takes to print out the Spirits book from the internet? It was not easy.
A lot of ink.
Yeah, a lot of ink. And then I went to Paris, to the Spiritist conference. And I had so many questions in my heart. I was a crazy North American. And I met Vanessa, not noted for her tolerance, actually. But she was actually very, very sweet. And I asked her about 20 times, how do I start a center? How do I start a center? I don't have any money. I don't know the rules. What do I do? And most of all, I don't have any money. And Vanessa said, after I'd asked her this question, you know, sometimes when you're seeking, you ask way too many times. After I asked her the question like 6 times, she said, well, Amy, have a bake sale. She really did say that. So I went back home, and I had many bake sales. And now I have a center. And very simply, what I've learned is that Spiritism provides the good soil for good seeds to grow in. And that prayer provides the nourishment, and God provides the light. And I am just the gardener, dirty hands, sore knees, but I'm surrounded by beauty. Thank you.
Allan Kardec, at the beginning of the Gospel according to Spiritism, he shares with us that the ideas in Spiritism are not new. And that's when he mentions about the universality of the Spiritist teachings. Being said that every one of you mentioned that we may find these very teachings under different names, different labels, everywhere and elsewhere. What specifically do you think Spiritism can provide to American spirituality in a very specific term or terms that none of the other ideas elsewhere can actually bring to American spirituality? Gloria.
Well, I think one area that's very important to Spiritism, and I think should be important in a society as a whole, is mediumship. And as someone mentioned this morning, mediumship certainly did not start with Spiritism. It's been around for thousands of years. And yet Spiritism has a beautiful, safe, and effective way of utilizing it for charitable purposes. And I think that the charitable purposes is the key word here. I have seen in the New Age movement a lot of interest in mediumship and psychic ability. And I've seen it used in many ways that were not charitable. And I've seen it used charitably too. But I think that, our center is in Boulder, Colorado, and Boulder, Colorado is a very New Age community, which is one of the reasons why it works, because it's not a big urban area, but people are open-minded about new ideas, and so they're willing to take a look at what Spiritism's all about. And one of the analogies that I give a lot to people who come to our center and say, I want to be a medium, and I tell them, well, you start with studying the Spirit's book, which takes about 6 to 8 months at least, of weekly meetings as we read it together and discuss it. And then you learn about Spiritist healing passes, and that's a 3-month course with a 3-month practicum. And then you'll read the medium's book and come every week to that study group, and then you'll join the medium's group. And by the time I finish listing that, they're usually gone. But it certainly weeds out the people who are not serious or who want to be mediums for the wrong reason. And the analogy that I often give is that we live in a society that has developed a very high degree, very high level of technology. And we don't have the spiritual and emotional maturity to always use it wisely. And so we use it destructively, and we use it self-destructively. And it's the same thing. It's no different with our inner technology, our spiritual faculties. If we don't use them and grow as a whole, grow emotionally, spiritually, morally, if we don't grow as a whole person, we're going to misuse that too. And there's some heavy karma involved. We're going to use it for our own ego gratification. We're going to use it for means of financial gain. And we won't attract the kinds of guides that we are hoping for, because the guides who we want to attract are not interested in lining the medium's pockets. And so it's very important. The person has to be developing on every level, and that's why we study, and that's why we meditate and pray, and that's why the mediumship is presented in the way that it is, in a very safe and effective way, and to be used only as a spiritual service. And who are we serving? We're serving incarnates and discarnates. You know, and when it's done in a spirit of service and with a high intention, then it is safe because our guides see to it. But when it's done for personal gain, even if it's just ego gratification, then we're not going to attract the guides that we want to attract, and it's not so safe necessarily. And so that's one of the things that I think that Spiritism can contribute to American spirituality, because most of our traditions, again, the Judeo-Christian and the Eastern traditions that we have imported, the way we have imported them, pretty much leave it out, if not condemn it altogether. So.
Dear viewers, thank you for being with us. Our Spiritist speaker today has brought us a better understanding about the Spiritism doctrine. Did you like this theme? I hope so, because Spiritism Today was made for you and to help us for our spiritual growth.
Now our daughter will offer the closing prayer.
Please pray with me. Give us this day our daily bread. Give us the necessary food for our maintenance of our physical strength, and also give us the spiritual nourishment for the development of our spirits. Celestial friends, please magnetize our water. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for being with us today. Goodbye.